I welcome viewers of the Free Russia Forum channel. We begin our traditional weekly stream with Garry Kasparov. Hello, Garry. Hello, everyone. Happy to see you. And I would like to remind you, and my editors tell me about it all the time, that our streams are watched by many viewers who are not subscribed to our channel, so please subscribe and like our videos. It helps us promote our videos on YouTube. And I think that this format, weekly format, actually justifies itself because many events happen over the week, and oftentimes the events that happen, they change the situation 180 degrees. And I would like to start with a conversation about the deal that was signed between the United States and Ukraine. And this deal is about rare minerals, and that deal was supposed to be signed long ago in the White House, and because of the scandal, it didn't happen. Nevertheless, now the document is signed, and sometime after that, they said that Trump is ready to provide Ukraine with American weapons. How do you evaluate this document, how significant it is, and does it mean that the situation between the United States and Ukraine, the situation has improved? I think here it would be proper to say that this is a relationship of Trump and Trump, Ukraine, and Putin, the triangle in which Trump is running around. He's kind of looking for the fifth angle on this triangle, which is strange, right? But nevertheless, this strange geometrical construct, and it has to do with the fact that Trump doesn't have his own policy. He has his own interests. And there are people in his administration who have different ideas of what to do. And this scandal in the White House was provoked by J.D. Vance, and he represents a group of, say, radicals, and they think that they should give up on Ukraine and make friends with Putin, and they're building their own triangle. It's Russia, China, and the United States. All the rest could be forgotten. And these people, they have an idea of the geopolitics of 1970s, and for some reason it's valid for them today. In the administration, there are people who support Trump, and in Congress, there are people who think differently. And I would say that the sort of verbal support of Ukraine and rejection of Putin's Russia in those circles is quite high. Even those who first vote for Trump and support Trump, but on the matter of Ukraine and Putin, they have quite a proper understanding that those are enemies. And that's why this pendulum goes back and forth, and somebody is going to dominate. And according to what we see, and the deal was signed in completely different format, not what they were demanding in the beginning. And in fact, this deal is kind of formal. Trump was persuaded that he has to do it. And now the press is writing about this. And I think the decisive argument wasn't about the interests of the United States, and Trump was not interested in that at all. Trump was scared by the fact that if Ukraine will be lost, then Trump will lose and he will be guilty. He keeps shouting that this is Biden's war, but listen, Donald, so you will be stained in the history if Ukraine loses. And I think those who are in the administration and those who are working backstage, traditional Republicans, so they kind of convinced Trump that no, it shouldn't be done like that because it's going to be bad for the reputation. And I think the deal is there, the weapons will come to Ukraine. But unfortunately, these are not the documents that you can rely on. So this is a document that you can use. No, anything can happen with Trump. And Ukraine is in such a situation where things are not great. And also, it's clear that Trump is tired of Putin. He's annoyed with him. Of course, we can talk about special relationship of Trump and Putin, how he respects Putin, but Putin keeps humiliating him. And again, the same Republicans, they all the time point out, like, Donald, Putin humiliates you every day. So how can you, with such a reputation, allow some thug from St. Petersburg, some KGB guy, humiliate you? And this plays a role too. And dynamics changes. And the dynamic has to do with the war within the circles of Trump. And given that this radical group positions are weakened and Musk is pushed aside, which was expected, and I think in general for Ukraine it's good news, and for us as well. The bad news is, or not even the news, but sort of a confirmation that through Medvedev and Peskov, Putin's spokesman, and Lavrov, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Peskov, Lavrov, Surkov, all these guys, these are people of functions. Medvedev, Peskov, and Lavrov. These guys announced to the whole world, through them Putin announced to the whole world that the war will continue. And now it's already there. It's sort of fixed. There are no any American plans or armistice and humiliating conditions for Ukraine, nothing. Putin needs everything. And it's not even about the territories. Putin needs this party to go on, because the war has become the meaning of Putin's state. That horrible meeting, tragic meeting, or it was a tragic farce when mothers of the killed Russian soldiers and officers, they thank Putin. And I understand how it used to be in the USSR, when they were thanking Stalin and Brezhnev for their happy childhood, but not for their kids being killed. It never even happened in the USSR. I hardly can imagine that Brezhnev is thanked by the mothers of the officers who died in Afghanistan. But obviously these mothers were paid for. We know how these tears of gratitude are made. This is the depth of the fall, and this is the real temperature of the society. And in this sense, Putin is quite logical. And it's not bad and it's not news, because it was clear to us. But now it becomes clear to the West as well, and only now. I'm very much surprised with the reaction of the Europeans. Right now I'm writing an article to the Germans dedicated to the Chancellor Merz coming in power. And I'm writing about the fact that the war is going, that you were told that the war is going, and Putin is building bases on the Belarus border and on the Finland border, and Putin already said that his goal is denazification of Europe. And for some reason, this inadequacy of the politicians in Europe, who grew on this yeast of the consensuses and agreements, maybe when Merz comes in power, he will change the tendency. And while Putin was heralding that the war is the permanent state, Europe was heroically responding to this with new plans, with declarations and decrees. But as soon as we get to the business, to doing something, then they can't do a thing. They can't resolve the issue with frozen Russian money. And they keep misleading the public, saying that we use the interest generated by the frozen money. Well, according to the Belgian law, this interest belongs to Belgium. You're a clear company that keeps the money. So they shouldn't lie. They should pretend that they're doing something. They're not doing anything. The money that is frozen generates interest, and this interest belongs to Euroclear. And Belgians kind of said, okay, take it. But when we're talking about 280, 300 billion dollars, they can't find a way to access it. I understand the consequences. Yes, of course, there are Chinese investments, Saudi Arabian investments, system of bonds, financial markets will be shaking. It's clear. But the war is going on. In the war, the rules are different. But they say, oh no, we can't. So we need to run the war comfortably, so that we have hot water, everything. Everything should be according to the rules. The world is integrated, the structure is very complex. You see, they can't shut down the trading with Russia. It's a myth that there is embargo. They keep trading through the third countries. Baltic countries trade, Finns trade, Germans trade, Poles trade through third countries. I would like to ask you the second question. Please finish. In the American Senate, they passed a law introducing, destroying sanctions. And that confirms what you just said. More than 70 senators voted for it. And here we're talking about secondary sanctions. And they may hit India and China. First of all, yes, right, it's an indicator of the moods within the political establishment in the United States. But is this measure effective? How effective it can be? And maybe because they don't have any other cards, so they decided to use these sanctions, and somehow the sanctions can be avoided. Well, let's talk about it. Sanctions are sanctions, and sanctions is a nice word, and there are sanctions that help you win the war, and there are sanctions that help you save the face of the bureaucracy, and there are some kind of intermediate sanctions. They kind of help you to save your face, but they're not critical. European sanctions, they're in this category. First, they're saving their face, and then to do some damage. But yes, sanctions do make damage, but they don't critically damage the economy. Trading is going, life in Russia is happening. Yes, economy is kind of going down. We see all the indices and the graphs and everything, things are going down. And of course it's unpleasant because the prices are going up, and because they have to trade through the third countries and they have some markup on the prices are going up, and they have to find the ways around through Arab Emirates and through China and through many other countries. But nevertheless, the economy is functioning. So they make weapons, they make missiles. Social stability is there in Russia, and the big centers like Moscow and St. Petersburg, the life is stable, which means Western sanctions are not as effective as they're talked about. They're individual sanctions, and they actually hit those people, those Russian citizens who are abroad, like us. So, and they don't care about it. So they kind of introduce those sanctions and whatever. They know how to win the war. They need to stop export of Russian oil, and the war will be over. They just physically have to shut it down in the north, and Russia won't have the money to continue the war. But there's a problem, you know, the Iran, and the prices will go up, China, and all other things. And I'm telling them, so what you're talking about the war, the economy? But they're like, yes, if. So there is a consensus of impotence in Europe, and they're in panic, and they're in panic that the world that they're building is going to collapse. They still didn't fix the problem with Hungary. This Trojan horse with this country is not settled. So Fico is going to Moscow to the victory parade. So you just need to close it. You just need to close it for them. Just make some actions. Do something. Well, a new resolution. They shouldn't do this, they shouldn't do that. They're discussing the matter of army. They can't recruit 36,000. They can't even recruit 26,000. Ukraine is bleeding and holding up Russia. But if it's not Ukraine, then the war will come to you. The problem is that their way of thinking is, we don't care whatever is after us, even a flood. And they think that Ukraine will stand, and then other politicians will come. If Europe can't acquire political face in the near future, there's going to be a total collapse of the European project. And this is actually on the conscience of those politicians who have the resource. Those who tell the truth, of course, they have political consequences, but people are not idiots. The war is going on, and Putin is going to attack you. He said it 1,000 times. Russian propaganda is talking about this. Medvedev spoke about it. Lavrov spoke about it. They're going to kill you. They are in the war. We have to fight in this war. And the sooner we win, the less the cost will be. Now there is official information that they build bases, military bases in the north. They're reinforcing their bridgehead in the north. But that's the way. You know, the war is the way of existence of the regime in Russia, and the war will be continued here, there, everywhere, because in Russia, Putin doesn't have any other resources, political resources, to stay in power. And to continue the war, he needs the money, and the money is the oil. I have 3 important points from the Ukrainian soldiers, their assessment of what's going on. Russians are actively using satellites of Europe and the United States for their warfare. That's back to what we spoke about, the sanctions. Also, Russian forces are very technologically savvy, and any technological finding is immediately scaled up. And here, we say hello to China and the engineering service of the Russian military forces they've been rearranged. And they're increasingly, incrementally speeding up their recruitment, and their forces are growing exponentially very, very fast. And this is the assessment actually that is correlates with what we spoke about. And I don't know what is supposed to happen. And in fact, everything is happening with the backdrop of NATO is collapsing, and I don't know what is supposed to happen in order to change the situation. Ivan, when you're saying it is collapsing, this is a delayed evaluation of what's happening. NATO has died. It's zombie. I wrote about it a year ago when they were celebrating their 75 years, when Biden was barely walking there. It's like symbol of the main NATO country, NATO. NATO doesn't exist. It's a zombie that doesn't know it's dead, but it is dead. Some people do have this understanding about what to do with this, but see, it's scary to admit it, that the world has changed, that you need to look the truth in the eye and see the situation is very different. The Ukrainian war, the war that Putin has waged, and this criminal war, this war is a vector of human history. This is a war that in its geopolitical and technological consequences, it can be compared only with the global wars that we can see in the past, like the American Revolution. It was a huge technological breakthrough, and the war took 4 years. And Napoleon Wars. This is also the 7 Years' War in the 18th century. These are the wars that changed geopolitics, and they changed the technological way of wars. This is the First World War, the Second World War, and that's why Ukrainian war is in this line as well. It's like 2 large wars per century. And these wars happen in the so-called technologically developed world. I'm not going to use the word civilization, but that's mainly European world, Euro-American world, that were that spearheaded technological progress. And when today I read about the huge rearmament of Pentagon that they plan, and they're going to produce 1,000 new drones and many other things. So the war changes technological way, and it changes geopolitical structure of the world. Obviously, everything changes, and the Russo-Ukrainian war does the same, and we can't see the end of it yet. There is such a saying that generals are getting ready for the yesterday's war, and we can see it today as well, because all these tanks, under the conditions of drones war, their efficiency is very much reduced. If Biden's administration wasn't in panic that there would be escalation, if they got rid of the thousands of tanks that were covered in dust in the desert, yes, back then in 2022, of course, yes, they could have lost a pile of tanks, but if they had few thousands of tanks in Ukraine in a week, some of them wouldn't have spare parts, but they would have gotten to the state border of Ukraine, just using the number of those tanks. But the situation is absolutely different. Yes, tank is a tank, but tank costs $10 million and the drone $5,000. Tanks have protection, yes, right, but probably 10 drones will break this protection. So in terms of economy, you have to run this war using different methods. It's a different war. Gary, I would like to bounce back to the United States again and return to our beloved Trump. It has been 100 days of his presidency. And many polls show that the level of trust to him dropped down to 41%. And this is the worst result for the last 70 years among all other American presidents. And also, less than 40% support him on the matters of inflation, tariffs, and others. Could you tell us, can we trust those ratings? Do they vary, say, between the ratings that are done by the left resources, left-oriented resources, and right-oriented resources? And Fox News probably shows different results. Now, the numbers are pretty much the same, and actually, the public polls, they're pretty much the same. But do you think it actually affects Trump in any way? How he perceives that? Right now, it's not critical for him, and of course he looks at them. But if you look at the meeting of his cabinet, and you saw how they were glorifying Trump in every way, and it looked more like North Korea, not like Soviet Union, and all those appointees of Trump, and they seem to be kind of sane people, and all of them are saying how great Trump is. I think for them probably it's the only way to function in the administration, to say something on camera how great Trump is. Yes, of course, the numbers are quite depressing, but right now Trump's power is based on controlling the Senate and Congress, and the lack of opposition in the Republican Party. The Republican Party is intimidated. In Congress, they need 3 people to support Democrats, and in the Senate 4. But right now the probability is pretty low because the level of basic support of Trump, the cult of Trump. Now this cult engages the majority of the Republican Party, and obviously anybody who is in opposition to Trump, he becomes a political dead man. So those Republicans, and we know them, who speak up and support Ukraine, and they're not satisfied with Trump in many issues, but they don't press the button yet. They're not ready. So far, the situation is under control, but in fact, it is getting worse. The principal matter is how fast Trump's actions regarding the tariffs will worsen the life for real. And it actually most probably happens in those regions that voted for Trump, and how Trump is going to deal with this, how he's going to react to it. All these are not clear. In fact, if we don't go into details, we have to say that America is going to a constitutional crisis, and the scenario can be easily imagined. More than 200 cases are considered in the Supreme Court. These are the cases that help courts impede Trump's decisions. And some of the cases will be finalized at the end of the summer, and even the conservative court may tell Trump that Trump broke the red line. And this is going to be a turning point. But Trump may say just go to hell, and he may refuse to follow the decisions of the Supreme Court, and it will be a different situation because the court doesn't have the army, and the Congress and the Senate will have to do something, and the Republicans, they need to decide, are they ready to support Trump in this situation? So this is the chain that will be unfolding up to the point when he's going to introduce the martial law. Right now it's kind of in embryo state, but the fact that people are talking about it, and they're kind of not speaking up yet, but they're talking about it. But the situation is different right now. It's not 50-50, it's not even 30 to 70%, but the fact is that the Trump may use any measures, and as of today we don't know how to stop him, given that all the key positions are taken by his loyalists. If we're talking about the Attorney General, the Pam Bondi, this woman is completely carried away. She's a Trumpist, and she keeps saying saying that Trump is genius and the greatest, and he says that we confiscated so much fentanyl and we saved lives of 110 million Americans, and it's like a third of the population of the country. So that is the greatest achievement for the 100 days. So, and this is the indicator that shows us that the scale of objectivity is shifted, is distorted, and how they're going to be to act in the situation if Trump decides to break the system of checks and balances. It's very hard to say what's going to happen, but some of them will go with him to the end. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm saying the situation is pretty dangerous here, and both sides are trying to consolidate, but the Democratic Party is completely bankrupt, is discredited, and right now we can't see any trend that the Democratic Party is going to be reformed. The ultra-left win actually helped Trump come in power, because Trump is actually feeding on this leftist ideological nectar. Let's put it this way. Because the main achievements of Trump in the eyes of voters, what he keeps in check, this is the immigration, the cultural wars, this transgenders, this fight against woke, and all other things. All these topics actually provide victory for Trump, and they continue supporting him. But at the same time, there are voices that speak common sense, and they say we need to forget about it. We need to protect constitutional order. Right now, the Democratic Party is unable to provide an alternative. So they have a problem with the message they would like to communicate to the public. So in fact, the Democratic Party within itself has several parties. That's why Republicans, being consolidated, they continue to be relatively invincible. And to expect that Trump, looking at the ratings, will act differently tomorrow, I wouldn't hope for that. Last time, Garry, we made this new thing for the audience, that audience can ask questions. You can write them in the chat, and we can discuss them, and the editors will send them to me. And Garry said that in Germany they're going to publish his article, and in the description to this stream you can find links to Garry's resources, his Telegram channel, his page on Facebook, and you can sign to them, and you can find the publications in the original language and their translation. Garry, we already touched on this topic, going back to Russia, and we'll discuss the parade that they're preparing. It's hysterical, it's completely insane there, it's just painful to look at what they're doing with children in kindergartens and schools, and there is a list of those who will come to Russia for this parade. And of course, the most significant figure in this list is Xi Jinping from China. Prime Minister Modi decided not to come from India. Some leaders of post-Soviet republics will come, and Mahmoud Abbas will come, and Robert Fico, the representative of the member country of European Union. And today we got the information that Marco Rubio might come. Trump won't, but Marco Rubio will. So don't you have this feeling that an official participation of the Secretary of State of the United States participating in this parade means something, and the leaders of these countries, the list of them is pretty weak, and we shouldn't take it as the end of the Russian political isolation. I didn't see this news about Rubio, but I can believe it, because Rubio right now is the floor mat that Trump uses to wipe his feet. And of course, it's a disgrace for America, and it's a disgrace for Rubio to be together with the murderers and to participate in this fascist parade. But I didn't see this news, and I don't know if it's true. But in fact, it's possible. It's possible. This is that very fight within the administration, and Rubio is one of those patsies that they use. And I don't think he will keep this position for long. He lost all his reputation on this position. He used to be a decent man. With a good reputation, but probably he didn't have any political future. He hoped to be a president, but it didn't mean that he had to lie under Trump and to put this sin on his consciousness, because he's a religious man, and to go to Russia, and by his presence he will be supporting de facto the murderers, because it's the parade of murderers, and they will demonstrate missiles that they launch against Ukraine. I understand it's possible, but nevertheless, for me it's very hard to imagine that Rubio can actually fall so low, and America can actually afford this. The America that we used to know, it doesn't exist anymore. It exists only in our memories. There is a good story. As far as I know, we haven't even discussed it publicly. And it has to do with your interview several years ago on the main channel in the Netherlands. I don't remember what year it was. I think it was right after MH17 was crashed, and when the Prime Minister of the Netherlands was going to Moscow for the parade, and you were in the studio of the main channel, and that argument was quite powerful when you said that your Prime Minister will be sitting right in front of the missile launcher that was used to hit the airplane with your citizens. Yes, I did say that. And back then the Prime Minister was the same man who is now the head of NATO. Rutte, right? Yes, I think. We can check it. We can check it on the computer. But I think it was him. But right now it's not just one missile. It's a machine of murder. What we'll see on the Red Square, this is a machine of murder. And any presence there will mean something. And besides that, it is support of this historic lie. And we spoke about it a lot. The 9th of May is Stalin's celebration. The war was over on the 8th of May. And the whole history of war is lie. Putin's press secretary Peskov said that Americans helped a little, but without the American help, we would have lost in this war within a year. Everything was collapsing. Nothing worked, despite the fact that they had a lot of tanks and planes and all that, so everything would collapse because they didn't know how to fight. Because the whole system was collapsing, and if they didn't have American and British help, everything would have ended. Stalin was begging for a separate peace with Hitler, but Hitler didn't do it. Stalin disappeared till July 3rd. They didn't see him for 2 weeks. No, in fact, it's not true. Stalin disappeared on 27th of June. From 23rd to 27th, he was there, and they just thought that Hitler attacked us first, but we are going to attack Hitler on the 23rd. Then they were ready to cross the board, and they will get the order to attack, but the war was lost within 5 days. That war that Stalin was preparing for to conquer Europe, so that war was lost, and then a different war began, and he started begging Americans to help, and Americans began helping, and British began to help, and all these stories that there was no any second front, but the majority of German aviation, German aircraft was in the Western Front, in Western Europe. Majority of it. Of course, those fronts were secondary, but nevertheless, they were distracting a lot of resources, and particularly aircraft. About 400 airplanes in this September of 1942 were sent to Africa from the Stalingrad sector. 400 airplanes. Back then, it was a huge number. In fact, the Kursk tank battle and the landing of troops in Sicily, Hitler had to stop the operation. And you know, this tank battle in Prokhorovka, who knows the history, those who know the history know how it ended. All these great victories because Hitler had to fight with American military machine. And the Brits also were helping there. When they managed to crack Enigma, they could read all the messages, all the coded messages that Germans were sending. And that's why all these myths that today's propaganda is creating. So please don't, kind of, all those who know a little bit about the history, they understand what's going on. But in propaganda, they created huge myths. And people who were fighting there and who were bleeding in that war, we grew up in the USSR and Russia. What happened? There was the 50th anniversary of the victory, and then the 60th anniversary. What they were given to veterans. They were not giving them anything, and it seemed like year after year these days, there are more and more veterans they have, which is weird. This is historical pattern in Russia. Any victory, any military victory is presented as the achievement of the regime, and starting with the Napoleon Wars, and because of those wars, all the reforms in Russia back then in the 19th century were stopped. And then Russo-Turkish War also created some prerequisites for further reaction in the country. Then the Second World War, and back to those days, the Crimea War, Russo-Japanese War, Cold War, Afghanistan War, and there is no any variant. So all these myths that you're told about Russia and all that, and it's like movements, anti-war movement, only military destruction of the regime will help us to change the political system in Russia. This is the formula. It's not a theorem, it's axiom. It's not supposed to be proved. That's why all these talks, we need to find some sort of interim decision. If you want changes in Russia, we need to help Ukraine win. We need to mobilize the whole West. And the total destruction of this regime, that's the only chance. Maybe we're late. Maybe there is no way to do this. Maybe it's the only chance for the future in Russia to decolonize and Russia. But at least we need to have a chance until there is the military collapse of it, until everybody understands that, everybody who is paying for this, for those for whom the war is a daily situation, a daily reality. Ukrainian flag in Sevastopol, that's the only chance that in people's minds there will be shifts, but they may not happen. But that's the only chance we have, this military destruction of the regime. A question from our chat, it was a difficult topic, why they were tormenting and torturing Ukrainian journalists so much. Victoria Roshina, the body of hers they delivered, and I don't even want to describe what they did to her body in Russian prison. How would you describe it? Why they did this? Nevzorov, the Russian journalist who immigrated, he said that it's a coded message. You can't see, you can't think, you can't speak. I don't know. Atrocity became a norm in Russia. Maybe it's a message. Maybe it's just we can, and that's why we did it. But maybe it's a message. Because these parts of human body that speak, think, and see were mutilated. Actually, they could have refused to return the body. What if they didn't? Well, they returned the body so that everybody could see it. It's like, we can do whatever we want. We can bomb kindergartens, we can launch missile strikes. We are untouchable. Nothing will happen to us. And this is what I say. They go unpunished, and it corrupts them. People change not as fast as technology, and the civilized world is supposed to live according to laws that restrict people's savage instincts. But right now, everything is unleashed. Like, do whatever you want, kill. Your Führer is responsible for you. You can do whatever you want. So, and we already passed that. We already were there. So this atrocity is not only in Ukraine. Yes, I probably told you, or in one of the interviews, there was a very good movie, documentary film about Sonderkommander from Hamburg. It was leftist cities, social democrats were there, and this is where Sonderkommander was founded. And in the film they show how they lose their human face and how they're involved in this machine of killing. Out of 6 million Jews who were killed in Holocaust, at least one third of them was liquidated, not in the concentration camps, but they were just shot in the head, where they had this physical contact. It wasn't a gas chamber, it was just direct contact. They were shooting people in the head. And right now we can see how this dehumanization is happening right in front of our eyes. Actually, it will work both ways. We can see it in Russia as well, because those people who lost their human face, those animals, they return to the country. That's why Putin can't stop the war. That's why he needs the war. He needs this material to be refreshed, so to speak, and he has to spend the money on it. He can't let this 1.5 million orcs back to Russia. When they come there without any safety pins, they will do the same as they did in Ukraine. Just imagine this for a second. That the brotherhoods of Afghanistan veterans who were controlling the criminal world back in the 1990s. And back then they still had some sort of ideas about norms. But with these guys, it's completely different. They have no idea about the norms. They just do whatever they want. And for them, killing is a norm. And keep in mind, it's not somewhere in distant Asia. It is here, in the neighbor country. I would like to switch to a different subject. It's very interesting and very unclear. Indo-Pakistani conflict. It came out of nowhere. There was a terrorist attack, and India and Pakistan are now on the brink of a big war. India closed its airspace, and now everything is very tensed. And the specificity of the situation is that both countries are nuclear, and some experts say that this nuclear status actually will keep them from a big military clash. Could you give us your brief evaluation, and could you tell us, is it a local story, or what we see is that the wars that are happening in Ukraine and Palestine and tensions in different parts of the globe, this breaks of the system of international security, and this Indo-Pakistani escalation is a part of this chain reaction, or this conflict that goes back to 1947, and it's the causes back there. So why one contradicts the other? No. In fact, the conflicts we're talking about, the war or the military conflicts and that are firing in all parts of the world, they all have long history. And Ukrainian war has its roots, and liquidation of Ukraine and Ukrainian nation, the roots of it are many centuries back to the time of czars. So here we're not inventing the bicycles. All these conflicts were living around us, and there were times when the conflicts were dormant and the world lived in compromises and understanding, but now there are points of the histories when everything is possible. Ukrainian war actually opened all the gateways of hatred, and that's why the degree of confrontation is growing everywhere. In the Pakistani story, clearly it goes back even in the more ancient times, but when we go to 1947, it was still British Empire. There was Raj, the king that was ruling India, British governor, so to speak, and include India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. That was the territory. And then it was clear that they need to divide it because there are Muslims and they're Hindus. And Gandhi tried to do that, but it didn't work out. And there was this disputable territory, and there was Bangladesh. It was called Eastern Pakistan. And as a result of this war, I think it was 1971 war, and Pakistan became independent, but this Kashmir ulcer, somehow they managed to agree, and they had provinces here and there, and now lately India began this process reintegration. But I'm not taking sides here, but the situation is clear to me. When they're preparing for military action that has to do with terrorist attacks, and they kill civilians, most probably you need to point out at the country that had economic problems. India is rising, clearly. It's a big country, it has its issues, but they have no reason to start a war. But Pakistan is different. And Pakistan lives due to the support of those radical groups, and this is ideology. Pakistani military intelligence and the army, and these provocations, they need them. Pakistan population is growing, I think, twice as big as Russia. It's a huge population, I think 270 million. Yeah, we need to check that. I think Indonesia is bigger than Pakistan so far. But the population is growing, but what to do? They can't really do much. That's why I think, and this is the provocation that brought us to these tragic events, and I think all this guilt is on Pakistan. Will nuclear weapons stop them? Maybe. But in fact, when your population is more than 200 million, there is a great desire to reduce it according to your resources. In the internet it says it's 237 million. It's more than Brazil. More than Brazil. And don't forget that Bangladesh is 160 million. Huge population. And a war was always a method to regulate social and political disbalances. I think anything is possible there. But there are deterrent factors. I don't know, maybe China. I don't know what America would do about it. But again, the region is far away from us. Let's put it this way. If something catastrophic happens there, I wouldn't be surprised. And in the context of all our discussion today, another question in the chat about the possibility of the Third World War. We discussed that, and you answered that question, but how would you assess the possibility of the Third World War? Well, in fact, you need to understand one thing, that the World War is a very kind of stretchy notion, especially when we're talking about the Third World War. For example, from history of Putin's Russia, the Third World War already happened. It was a Cold War. This is in their history. This is how Putin's propaganda in the historic, so to speak, science sees the history. And now it is the Fourth World War. According to Putin, the war is going. It's the fourth war, not the third one. So and tell Ukrainians that the war is not going. So it is going. But in Ukraine, it is more aggressive and atrocious. Putin fights with the civilized world. And this is the war between freedom and tyranny. And it's going on across the world. And it's not about if it is. It is. Will it become global? It can become global. Putin is a rat. And all this regime, they can't get to the United States. They make mastermind some provocations and they try to dig under the regime and all that, but they know how to land. But on the other hand, people will be dying. They're like the malignant tumor. They will be growing. But if I properly understand the idea of the question, that is it going to be this Third World War when the missiles will be flying back and forth? No, it's not going to happen. And another delicate matter, and I understand it's a speculation, but under the conditions of NATO destruction and the growing sense of impunity, is it possible that there will be provocation against the Baltic countries from Putin's side? There may be some missile, right? Yes, quite possible. I think this question is quite rhetorical. We have so-called credit history of this geopolitical Jack the Ripper. Missiles are flying back and forth. We see that. It's quite obvious that it's not just possible. The probability of this is growing every day. This can be stopped, and I can give you a scenario. And let's just fantasize. Say, the government of Merz, Chancellor of Germany, the new government, in a week, they make a decision to rearm Germany, and they announce that Germany thinks that since America left NATO, and again, it's my fantasy, I'm just fantasizing. I'm just telling you under which conditions Russian missiles will never hit Vilnius or Riga or Tallinn. The government of Germany, they announced creation of a military bloc. The Poles, Scandinavian countries, and Germany, and the German government says that under these conditions they need a modernized European nuclear weapons, and this new bloc, within, say, 6 months, I don't think they will need more, they settle the matter. And as soon as on the border of Poland they will have nuclear missiles that will aim at Moscow, and it takes them like 15 minutes to get to Moscow, I think immediately the matter will be covered. Just have these missiles that will fly pretty quickly, not from DC, but from here. So are you planning to bomb Berlin? Fine. Okay, here are the rockets, here are the missiles. And those missiles in Poland, they will fly better than the Russian ones. So there is no any other variant. Those missiles can be in Finland, and the matter of war will be closed. No war, that's it. They're rats. They're cowardly rats. They can kill journalists. They can defile her body. They can shoot at kindergartens, but they can't win the war. They pile up the corpses, but they can't win the war. This is a story. This is the whole history of it. And sadly, this history repeats itself. And the cycle should be broken. And the cycle can be broken only when this insane imperial idea is buried in the dumpster. So, with this optimistic note, let's finish. But before we say goodbye to Garry, I would like to report about what's happening with the book of Alexander Skobov. With Garry's help, we call the book The Righteous Man. There are more than 50 articles in Kiev. This book will be released. Right now it is being translated into Ukrainian. It will be in two languages, Russian and Ukrainian. In the description box to this stream, besides the resources to Garry Kasparov, you can find the payment system where you can make a donation, 30 euros. That will help us to increase the number of copies of the book. And when the book is released, you will get the book. It will be delivered to you either in Russian or in Ukrainian. So follow the link, and if you didn't do it yet, so please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And I would like to add here that the book will be translated into English as well. And you will be able to buy it in English as well. There will be a foreword written by Garry Kasparov. So we'll scale it up. It's just the first step. And I hope that in May we will be able to show you the copy of the book and you could buy it. Thank you, Garry. Thank you for a great conversation. We'll see you next week. Thank you, our viewers. Please stay with us. Stay with Free Russia Forum channel. Thank you.